and his bandmates came to prominence in the 1980s as part of the band Classix Nouveaux, often credited became synonymous with the early MTV era. Though only moderately successful in the US, they topped the charts and headlined for hundreds of thousands of fans throughout Europe. Still, at the height of their success, their lead singer felt that there was something missing from his life. His search for answers led him on a pilgrimage to Italy's San Damiano, where his life and career changed forever. Hello, I'm Ernie Manouse. Coming up on Interviews, our conversation with musician and Catholic youth leader Sal Solo. Is there a different thrill performing before thousands of people in a rock venue as opposed to in a missioning venue?
Well, it's not so much a question of the numbers, because the minute you said about the arena thing, I recalled I used to at one time be with a huge rock band in Italy. They were called Rockets, and everybody in Italy of a certain age knows them. They sold 1.5 million albums, but they had their, like most bands, they had their up period and their down period, so this was on the way down. We were doing a tour of Italy, and we had a concert in a particular, it was like a big tent type thing. And just before the show, the manager came backstage and he said to me, "There's only 70 people in there, so I'd understand if you want to cancel it." So I said, well, those 70 people have paid their money, you know, just the same as if there was 70,000, so I think we should really do it. Yeah. So we went out, and the 70 people right at the front of the stage, you know, there, best seats in the house, and you have to try so much harder because there's no atmosphere. And so when you're playing if you like, a missionary venue, a Christian venue, normally speaking, they don't really know who you are. There's not that many fans as you get in the mainstream. So it is very hard. And it took me a few years of doing this, and I thought, why is it always so hard now compared to what I used to do? And I realized in the mainstream of music, only your fans come and see you. And so everybody who comes to see you already knows all your songs, and they're singing them, and they're excited to be there. But when you're going out as a missionary, you literally are touching people who don't know who you are, maybe don't care. Yeah. So you have to actually win them over from nothing. And so I think it's probably made me much better as a communicator, really. You know, I've learned new skills I would never have known I needed.
Is there a different thrill, though, that comes from it? Do you feel something differently when you're performing one way or the other? And if you do, what is that difference?
Yeah, I think there is a difference, and the difference would be that when you are in the mainstream of entertainment, whether it be rock music, whatever, it's all about you. You are the idol. You know, American Idol, in a sense, is well named because if you think about some of the greatest rock shows that went with Queen, "We Will Rock You," and they're all basically like they're worshipping in a church, but it happens to be Freddie Mercury, right, who is the idol. And so I think when something goes well, or it goes exciting, as you use that word, in a kind of Christian musical event that I might do now, I would feel pleased that God is winning out, if you like. Yeah. And they are receiving something more valuable than if it was simply my singing. I think the great thing, you know, the way God as the creator works things out is a lot of the things that we do like that, we do when we're very young and stupid and we have no idea what we're doing, but we think we're the greatest anyway. Mm-hmm. So therefore you can take it. But now, much later, I would tend to feel there's no point in them worshipping me because I'm going to let them down. So it's better that they don't. You know, look up there.
Yeah. Okay, take me all the way back. Always music in your life?
No. When I was a young kid in elementary school, I was good at painting, and so everybody always told me that I would grow up to be a commercial artist. I didn't know what that was, but it sounded boring, so I didn't like the idea of it. And then at a certain age, I don't know what age now it would be, I'd have to think about that, but anyway, I came back from school one day, and my mother had discovered a radio station that played Tamla Motown songs. See, mothers are great, aren't they, for things like this? They help us. And she was so excited. So there's Stevie Wonder and all the others. And I thought, wow, you know, I mean, first of all, I'm surprised at my mom. You know, I didn't know she was so cool. So that was kind of good. And then from there, I kind of quickly graduated to Led Zeppelin and other things. And so everything else was out the window then. It was like, I've got to do this.
Do you find people that have artistic talent in one field can switch to another?
Well, I think it's all creativity, because equally, if we come fast forward to the present day, I do much more speaking than I do singing, and I've learned to be a good communicator from the skills that I had as a singer. Mm-hmm. Because it's the same thing. If you want to touch a person that's listening, whether it's, as your first question alluded to, whether it's a stadium crowd or a small crowd, I think it's somewhat easier these days, because obviously when they're doing stadiums, they've got all the big screens and everything, so they don't have to have quite the same skills. Right. But in my heyday, when we would have 10,000, 20,000 people, you've got to reach out to the back of the arena and the people in the highest seats. And so you've got to be a bit larger than life. Some of the bizarre makeup I used to use in me and friends like Boy George, you know, it wasn't only just because it was the fashion, it was extravagant, but there are techniques in that. When you put kind of some white and then some black to make your eyes look bigger from a distance, and shoulder pads so they can actually see your shape. And so I'm glad that I was able to do what I did at the time I did it. Yeah. But definitely, yes, one form of creativity can easily transfer to another one. I had a book once, you know, and I always think when I'm older, I used to say when I'm old, so I'm already old, so when I'm older, then I might write some more books, because that seems like you need a lot of time for that, time investment. And so I sort of imagine myself as an old person when I can't move as fast or as far or something, that maybe writing would make sense.
When did the name Sal Solo come to you?
I think I tried a few different names when I wanted to be a star first, because you see, people that were big before me in England were people like David Bowie, and there was Gary Glitter and Alvin Stardust, and that was a bit cheesy, so I wasn't going to exactly do that. But I always liked the idea that showbiz should be larger than life, that rock music should be larger than life, should be entertaining, you know, like Alice Cooper and things was one of the best shows I ever saw. And so the Sal part, really, Salvador Dali, the painter, gave me that idea. And the solo part, I'm not sure I should tell you that, because actually that ages all of us, because it came from the man from U.N.C.L.E. who was called in the 60s Napoleon Solo.
Really?
But I later discovered, when I became a successful, you know, singer in Italy, they actually have a big rock star, an old guy, who's called Bobby Solo. And I've met other people around the place who either are called Solo or something very close. I know one guy in Chicago right now who's called Sal Solis, and there's quite a few Mexican people with the last name Soto. Yeah. And so I found it's not quite as bizarre as I thought. I probably should have chosen something far more extravagant.
Is Sal Solo, though, the person you now, or do you see it still as somebody you put on? And when does that shift?
Me. No, it's always been me. I had a very unhappy childhood upbringing, and so for me it was very important to draw a line, because I remember when I first became Sal Solo, and my older sister, who lives in Canada, she, inevitably families, they have a hard time initially accepting that sort of thing, and so she said, well, it wasn't all bad, was it, you know, your early life? And I said, no, it wasn't all bad. But today, I'm the person I make myself, the person I want to be. Yeah. So therefore, I want my name, not a name that I associate with that. And when we talk about families accepting it, it's kind of funny, because when I became successful, my mother used to have a poster on the back of the door of her living room that she got from some teen magazine or something. And she lived opposite the church. And so she used to be in the church every day, and the priest would come in for a cup of tea. Now, when I started doing Christian events, and sometimes I would speak to priests and so on, and give various retreats, whatever. And so the priest, a new priest actually arrived, came in for a cup of tea. So while she's out at the kitchen making the tea, he noticed the poster. So when she came back in, he said, are you a fan of Sal Solo too?
So he hadn't put it together yet.
Oh, he had no idea. You know, so that was kind of funny. You know, why you'd think an old lady would be a fan of Sal Solo, especially with the, you know, that was the black glove and the leather sort of period.
And let me take you to that period now. The New Romantic movement. Not only were you part of it, you pretty much spearheaded it with your group. You guys were the ones that came up with this whole, which changed music greatly.
Yeah. Well, I remember the first time the phrase was used, and I don't think many people know this actually, but it was in a music magazine, and they mentioned 3 bands. 2 of them, I don't know if they really were known in America. Of course, my band wasn't that known in America either, so it's, you know, it's very much a Brit strange thing. But anyway, it was Classix Nouveaux, it was Ultravox, and Japan was the name of the other group, and they called them the New Romantics. And so when I read it, I thought, oh, that's interesting. So that's what we are. Yeah. And then in a relatively short period of time, you had people like Duran Duran and others wanting to jump on the bandwagon. And I don't say that in a disparaging way. I mean, if the Duranis were watching or something, maybe they'd be offended because, you know, they became a big famous band. But I have to tell you an absolutely true story that their manager, the first time we played with them, put his head round the door of my dressing room afterwards and said, we want to get in on this new romantic thing. Who can we contact? Yeah. And next thing, you know, within 3 weeks, we see them in the music papers with all bandanas on their heads and makeup and whatever.
So what was that movement? Where did it come from?
It came from, I think, this feeling of decay that went through the 70s when we were growing up in England. I mean, it may have been the same here, I'm sure, with gas lines under the Carter administration and so on. And so, first of all, punk came out of it, and that was obviously no future and blow everything up. And after a few years of that, I think we got to a point as young people where that wasn't really getting us anywhere. And so it was almost like a kind of escapism. We used to go to these particular clubs where everybody would be some kind of exotic peacock. And so there's the one guy dressed as Marilyn, and then there's all kinds of, everybody had a character, a persona. And my first album, called Night People, was based on that very thing. They lived at night, and they lived for the night. And some of them went on to become famous. Quite a few of them did records after that. But it was almost like the personality came first. Now, I think you probably could lump along with that an interesting little historical thing with the technology, because it just so happened that synthesizers and drum boxes were coming to their own at that time. And at the present day, I'm always quite fascinated by popular dance music, because to me it all sounds like the same thing we did speeded up. It's the same kind of riffs, you know, the same kind of beats and the same machines, and they want to try and imitate what they call the vintage sounds of the 80s, so I could easily make that stuff.
When did you realize you guys had succeeded, when you had made it? Was there a defining moment for you?
Well, I think there's different stages of it. The first stage is when you get your record deal, so you know you're going to record an album. So recording an album is the first exciting thing. As kids, you dream of that all your life if you want to be a musician, you know. The next stage is probably when you actually get to play to some really big crowds in an arena. The first arena concert we had was in Yugoslavia, and our first silver disc and #1 records and things, so that's kind of exciting. And then you always want to really make it in your home. And my group Classix Nouveaux was always far more popular elsewhere. And so I guess when we finally got a top 20 hit in our own country, that was another, it took a couple of years, but so that was really a thrill, you know. I mean, maybe even you could say things like our first video for Guilty would be a milestone, just you actually see this creative artistic thing that is a bit like a movie, you know, that's kind of exciting too.
During all of this, there comes a point, now you're getting noticed, you're having success, you're making money, you've got your record deal, but you're not satisfied. Something's missing. How did you first interpret what that was?
I think the significant thing for me was that my group Classix really traveled to lots of very strange places, partly because our manager was a bizarre person. His father was sculptor to the Queen, and his mother was a poet, and his sister was called Electra, and he was called Falcon. And so he didn't just do the normal things and go the normal way. So he would come one day and say, well, you fancy going to Thailand? Now, you can't sell any records in Thailand because everything's bootleg. And the same thing happened with India. And he just thought it'd be interesting to see the world. And we thought, why not? Really? Mm-hmm. We were so young and naive, we didn't really think about money. And so we would have spent all our time here in the United States, so we were thinking of money. But instead, we're in India. And I do remember being really confronted with the poverty. Everywhere you turn up at the airport. Now, in other countries we go, there's hands pressed up against the windows, which are fans screaming and stuff. But here it's beggars, and so you come out the first night in Bombay. We walk through the street, and there are people sleeping on the sidewalk and sleeping on wheelbarrows and whatever. And I was thinking of some of the political things that were going on around that time, strikes and whatever, and the fact that in our Western civilization, if you had a black and white TV at the time, obviously today nobody does, but back then, if you had a black and white TV, that was poverty. You know, you're under the poverty line, but nobody lacked anything or wanted anything. And suddenly, there's thousands and thousands of people that have not even a roof over their head. And when the beggars come around, particularly the children, they'll hold out their hands, and if you give them something, they don't go away. Next thing you've got 10 more, and then 10 more. And so I was just really, really challenged by that. And so when I came home, I think I was never quite the same. I couldn't just take in all the luxury and the self-indulgence and everything of the rock and roll lifestyle. And so I started looking for something somewhere beyond. And I didn't know what that something somewhere would be, because I was brought up as a Catholic, and like most Catholic, or if you like religious youth, probably, it seemed kind of boring and out of touch. And so I didn't initially think it was going to be God or Christ, but I was open to find something. And it just so happened that I met somebody at that time who was a born-again Christian and started taking me along to Christian events and gave me a different view on things.
Right.
And so it turned out it was God and Christ after all.
There was a story I remember of another artist, musical artist, who came to you and kind of was like, you guys were on the down low, it's secret. I hear you're a Christian.
Yes, that is the story. he probably wouldn't mind me sharing that. That was, the group was called Kajagoogoo, and of course they had a big #1 song called Too Shy Shy that you still get occasionally on the Where Are They Now or the One Hit Wonders. And so they were starry-eyed young hopefuls, and he did indeed, Nick, who was the bass player, came up to me and said, I've been wanting to meet you. And I said, why is that? And he said, I heard you were a Christian. And I'm thinking, who's been saying that about me? You know, let's get them. Yeah. Because I wasn't, really. But he was naive. He was 19 years old at the time. We're still friends today. And so, yeah, he was the one that started dragging me to Christian things. And he didn't know that oftentimes Protestants and Catholics don't, get along or don't share the same kind of views. And then we decided to go out on a pilgrimage trip to Italy, a place called San Damiano. And then I was kind of zapped, and next thing I felt like he did. Yeah. And that was the beginning.
What happened at San Damiano for you?
Well, you're in the middle of nowhere, and so you don't have any of the normal distractions. Now, I realize today that a lot of people, when they decide to go on a retreat, the concept is if you remove yourself from your normal environment, then it's more likely you will find answers to what you're looking for, more likely that you will find God, even in other religions. Obviously, Hindus, they have ashrams and things like that. And so we're in this little village in the middle of nowhere, and all people do there is pray. And so the first night, Nick is saying to me, this is wonderful here, isn't it? It's just like heaven. And I thought it was just like hell, and I wished I could get out of there. But then the other thing that's very interesting is you meet people that you just would never meet in showbiz, because they're usually little old ladies with their rosary beads or whatever and their prayer cards and stuff. And I remember sometime later they told us that when we came to town, you see, I don't know if you remember how Kajagoogoo used to look at the time. He had kind of a bobble top and all these beads hanging down, and there I was with the way that I looked. And so they're not used to seeing people like that in religious places.
Right.
And indeed, we were not used to the kind of people that are there. And I found it so refreshing because in show business, whether it's rock music, whether it's TV, whatever it is, people generally are so superficial and backstabbing, and everybody's nice to you to your face, and everybody wants to step over you and, wants to see the back of you, really. And so here was people that had nothing to gain. They weren't in our circles. They weren't attempting to do the same kind of things. And they all had very simple stories of how God had touched their lives, and I think that really challenged me. And after a couple of days in the peace, without all the distractions, I found I didn't any longer desire the things that I desired before.
Yeah.
And I felt that God is real, and God's there and speaking to me.
And both worlds collide for a moment, because you're going to come back home and you're going to record a song about that experience, which ends up being a very big hit for you.
Mm.
But I've got to assume that this is going to be a very different journey now.
Well, it was very interesting because initially I was going to give up music and so on, because the only thing I knew was if you're holy, you become a priest or a monk or you go to a monastery. And I thought I'd lived a very evil life as a rock star, going around indulging myself. And I remember noticing one particular young man from Portugal, I think he was, and when he was praying, he looked completely engrossed and almost angelic. So I kind of wanted what he had. So one day I was speaking with him, and he said to me, "What do you do?" So I'm a bit embarrassed to explain, we're nasty rock and rollers. And to my surprise, he smiled and he said, "I can see why God has called you here, because young people of the world listen to music. You can use music to tell them what is here." And so I thought, this is very ironic. For the first time in my life, I'm willing to give it all up, and he's telling me this is what God wants me to do. So I decided I would do a song about this conversion experience. And it was completely different in every way to anything I'd done before and everything that people thought about me. So two things happened. First of all, within the record company, even before it was released, I found people that worked there coming and saying, when I heard this song and it really touched something. I mean, they start telling me their problems or whatever, So that's interesting. I never had that before. And when it became a hit, the song, everybody could instantly see something had happened. And what's happened to you? I didn't look the same. I didn't dress the same. I didn't sound the same. Mm-hmm. And so I found all of my interviews right away were all about God. But the truth is I didn't know much about him because I'd only just discovered him. And so I'd be embarrassed and ashamed now to have to look at any of those darn things, because since then I've spent 25 years learning about God. And then I was simply, it's great, you need some of this. Come and do the same as me.
You had said once that the irony in all of this for you is that when you were young and had nothing to say, everybody wanted to know what you thought. And then when you actually had a message you wanted to share,
absolutely true.
They all pulled away.
Yes. I can remember doing press conferences in Tel Aviv where we had #1 songs, and they're asking, what do we think of the war and whatever. I had no idea. I didn't even follow news and current affairs back then. And when you see, if you are a person of faith or of answers or of solutions, and you see people who are struggling and they really need answers, it's really very sad that they want to close the door when you do have the answers. Mm-hmm. And the answer is not one thing. It's not, all right, you all have to go to the Catholic Church or something like that. The answer may be something different for each person, but nevertheless there is an answer. And so you don't have to accept defeat in life. You don't have to accept permanent depression. You don't have to accept failure. There's always a way to point yourself if you could just seek the help that you need. But rock and roll and entertainment is not really about answers. And it took me a long time to discover that, because I naively believed I almost want to blame the Stones there, it's like it's only rock and roll and I like it, whatever, that you feel anything goes, but it doesn't really.
Do you ever wonder what if? Do you ever look back and say, if this hadn't happened, where would I have gone?
No, I think that the only thing that really frees the human spirit is doing something for someone else. For instance, I talked about not accepting depression. Well, if you're depressed, instant solution, go out and visit somebody, an old lady, a sick person, somebody in need, and you won't be depressed anymore because you won't be focused upon you. And your issues are probably not that bad, really. When you go and find somebody that doesn't have any arms, or somebody that's living on the street. And so, to me, it's necessary, actually living for other people, doing something for other people, helping other people. It is necessary for us to experience the fullness of being human. And it's no accident that Jesus didn't say, you're going to get to heaven by going to church all the time, or saying lots of prayers. He really never said anything like that. He actually said, when I come back, I'm going to ask you, when I was hungry, did you give me something to eat? When I was sick or in prison, did you visit me? Because what you did for the least person, you did for me, and what you failed to do for that guy on the street, you failed me. So the way to heaven, and I'm not making this an anti-church statement, I'm not saying don't go to church, don't pray, but realistically, the way to heaven is to live for others.
And on that note, I have to thank you for all the living you've done for all of us. Sal Solo,
Thanks so much.
A pleasure.